Welcome back to Dual Source Discourse. The two procurement nerds are back. We are recording on a Monday afternoon, releasing in a couple days. And Dr. Eloise, is it fair to say you're a bit of a TikTok nerd as well? You spend more time than you care to admit on the platform?
Exactly. I am absolutely addicted to it. And I, where sometimes I will take TikTok breaks throughout the day when my brain is spinning. I just will step aside for a few 10, 20 minutes and just scroll through TikTok. I'll do it before bed, which you're not supposed to do. I'll do it on the weekend endlessly. So yeah, I watch too much TikTok.
So, given your TikTok addiction, what are we going to chat about today? This is something that you actually suggested based on trends and some reoccurring things that you've noticed on TikTok.
Yeah, so one of the big things about TikTok is there will be lots of various trends and they pop up really quickly and they cycle through. And again, this is not meant to be political, but with the tariffs that the US is imposing on China, it has created a whole series of even back to the TikTok ban. There's been a whole series of Chinese-based content that has flooded TikTok, and it's fascinating. And especially with the tariffs and the trade war that's going on right now. Of course, what is today? April 28th, 2025. So we have to timestamp this because
Yeah.
the stuff is changing all the time. However, over the last few weeks, as the tariffs have been announced and escalated and de-escalated, there's a whole trend of Chinese companies that claim to be the suppliers of the big luxury brands and even just regular CPG companies. And they are saying to American TikTok viewers, hey, and they're picking on Lululemon and Coach and several others. We're the ones making your fancy designer bags. And oh, by the way, they're like $5 or $10, but you're paying $5,000 for them. So come buy from us, and you don't have to pay the tariffs. And I forget, I don't really know what the logic is, but well, even just like there's just video after video after video, and there's also another one that there's again a Chinese supplier that purports to make Tide Pods, and they say buy them from us, they're only 5 cents. So essentially, you'd be buying the non-branded product direct from the Chinese supplier, which again, politics notwithstanding, I was like fascinated that and this is really an intersection between marketing and procurement, because what are you paying for? And by the way, there's no guarantee that these are legitimate. I haven't taken the time to authenticate whether they're true or not. But the fact that you would have all of this content talking about suppliers, and of course, in relation to the brands, those of us in procurement, we deal with this all the time. So I just thought it was utterly fascinating that this became the salvo in at least the social media aspect of the trade war. And just to sort of take it even further, the ones that I saw this weekend were even more fascinating, in which, and again, I don't know if any of these are real, and it doesn't really matter if they're real or not. Just these ideas that are floating around really make us have to question manufacturing, what happens, and how we sell and retail in general. And so the one that came out over the weekend was that the Chinese are supposedly going to set up shopping malls on container ships just outside of international waters. And so you could, in theory, I'm guessing, go out into international waters and buy all of your designer bags and leggings and whatever else, and then bring it back and not have to pay tariffs or anything. So I just thought this was an utterly fascinating topic in terms of like suppliers, marketing, and sort of what this means.
Mhm. So I think to me, there's three kind of really interesting topics that fall into this. The first is eroding brand mystique.
Yeah.
So, one of the big things that luxury brands do is they masterfully create a persona or a FOMO or this era of exclusivity that only people of a certain status or from a certain background or certain wealth or whatever it may be that can be a part of the club or afford to be a part of this group. So it's very interesting that people, average everyday people, can make a video for free and upload it and have potentially erode this mystique around these brands and have billion-dollar impacts on these companies. So that to me is just really interesting, and it's showing the shift in marketing
Eh,
and how influencer and social media marketing is becoming so important because it can disrupt a brand overnight.
And you can there would be an argument. I'm not saying I'm making this that you could weaponize this. Weaponize, that's probably overstated, but you could target brands and undercut them and undercut their value by taking this campaign on. I'm not saying that's what's happening here. I'm just saying like that's the world we live in.
Yep. Second thing I think is interesting is luxury brands historically have invested heavily in legal crackdowns. So going after, quote, counterfeit. I don't know how at this scale they can go after everyone and everything legally anymore. It's like become bigger than them. And so that was kind of their safety net. And I feel like that safety net is going away. And the ability to scare people or financially go after people, I just don't think is that reasonable anymore. Sure, you may be able to pick, a couple people or a couple groups, but when it's massive on TikTok globally, you can't. I mean, there's just no way to go after everyone. So that's going to be an interesting thing to play out, is how do luxury brands counter this?
Well, and it's if you combine it with the previous one, point, it's like who are you targeting? And and I mean, it's not only who you're targeting, is this the government? Is it particular influencers? But I think even it just calls in, like it makes you question, because actually let's just say none of these are legitimate. It, but I think there's very few people that would be surprised that X brand is outsourcing and manufacturing to China, and it's the fact that it could be true that makes this so that makes it, if it was a lie, that makes the lie so powerful.
Mm-hmm. And then my third or kind of note or theme here in doing my research is I feel like there's a major shift in consumer behavior. I'm 42 now, so from when I was in high school versus today, I feel like back when I was younger, there was much more of a focus on like name brands
Hmm.
and being a part of this exclusive group of people that can afford or wear or do certain things. And I don't feel like that is still the vibe anymore.
Oh
And
my God.
I would say particularly Gen X
Yeah.
or just
Gen
Gen
Z.
Z is becoming more price conscious. And what does that mean? When you become more price conscious, you become less brand loyal and you don't care as much about the name and the reputation and the history behind the brand as much as that you're getting a good value. So what does that mean? You're okay accepting alternatives. That would be like instead of me buying a $400 swimsuit for my trip to Florida in 2 weeks, I'm okay going to Target and spending $18 on a swimsuit.
Or you might just overnight it on Amazon.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so I'm going to clearly date myself, but I remember all the way back to fifth grade, Jordache jeans came out and they were all the rage, and like I can just viscerally go back and remember that Jordache, and then there was Levi's button fly 501 blue jeans. All these jingles that get stuck in your head as we were talking about last week. But I agree with you. The brand, like in the 80s and 90s, like a BMW was a status symbol in the 80s, like a big time yuppie status symbol. I think even up until up until this year, Teslas were a status symbol, and obviously for obvious reasons, that's not quite the same anymore. So I definitely think, but to your point, I completely agree that Gen Z, I think they're exposed on platforms like TikTok and Instagram, that they are exposed to the environmental impact of fast fashion, of just these very deleterious manufacturing impacts, whether it's CPG or bags or leggings. And so I think they are more willing to buy secondhand, both economically, but also just in terms of making more conscious choices, second generation, third, re-wearing of clothes. So I do think that is a big change as an observer of that generation.
So I think I mentioned this on one of our episodes last year, but Paul has two girls, Elise and Claire, and Elise is at Cal Poly, so she's a junior. And when I was in college, thrifting was not a thing. Like
Yeah.
that was not like a cool thing that you did or talked about. If you went to a thrift store to buy something, you didn't like tell people. You just did it, washed it, and then didn't mention it. But it's like a whole world now where kids get together and they don't want to spend $300 on a pair of jeans. They want to go thrifting and buy used things. So again, just tying more into this whole thing around people being more cost conscious and not being as attached to a brand. So from a supply chain perspective, I mean,
Well, let me just say, and eco-conscious. I do think that is a big, big thing. Since we apparently in the US don't believe in ESG anymore.
yes. We've done what, 3 ESG episodes
I
now?
don't know, but it keeps coming up. Anyway, sorry, I got us off topic.
But I think so, tying this whole movement around exposing luxury brand supply chains or the actual costs, I think this brings up a question around what is a fair price for a company to charge.
Yeah.
So if you are manufacturing products internally or you're doing it through a third party and you're reselling, and now there is transparency and visibility in the market, how do you charge? What's a reasonable margin? Because business owners need to make money too. We're not all sitting here running a charity living off trust funds. But I think the argument would be if a luxury brand is, at a 400% margin, is that reasonable and sustainable and fair? And if luxury brands lower their pricing, what does that mean?
Well, and I think there's a corollary question that I have. I absolutely think that's right. And the question is if I'm paying for that logo as a status symbol, does it have the requisite quality? Because one of the things that at least I wrestle with in my own purchases is I will pay more money for higher quality and that I will keep the thing for a long time versus just buying something cheap that'll last a couple of times or a couple of years and then it's in a landfill. So I think having that option and yeah, I think that's important because oftentimes with the cost and speed to market or the cheapification and the speed to market and all these changes, the quality has suffered in many industries for many products.
Mhm. So I think we're going to see, especially in retail and in luxury goods, kind of an upheaval and a major change in the market in the next 12 months. And it's going to heavily impact supply chain
Well,
and how people source, what systems they use, what processes, how they become more efficient, leveraging AI to reduce costs. If they need to take out 50, 60, 70% of cost, where do you go? You look at supply chain.
yeah. And I also think it's worth noting that like there is this question about, we're posing a lot of questions today, but I had written about this in my book, is all of our supply chains are built for ever increasing demand. But what happens when demand drops? And demand dropped while uh, goods were scarce during the lockdown and the pandemic. At the same time, consumers changed their buying behaviors. They had to because you couldn't get stuff. And so they did without, they repaired things longer, they kept things longer because you just couldn't get them. So do we enter this phase where consumers consume less? And that will have an impact too on supply chains. And I do think one of the, let's say, tertiary issues with the trade war is what happens if you can't, because the news is all full of this, the shelves are going to be bare pretty soon because there's a lag time. Do we just adapt our behavior and just consume less, which means then when things go back to normal, do we actually have less consumption? And I think that's really worth teasing apart, because you can't have like the premise of most supply chain designs is that you can move fast and there's never ending demand, and it's how do we keep up with never ending demand? But that might be the wrong thesis.
So interesting. Let's take for a second. So I do believe that people are starting to consume less.
Yeah.
I do think it's a trend in my network, and my household in particular. I would say we consume less now than we did 3 years ago. And so making a prediction, I would say I think we're going to see that as a trend. So then as a retailer, where do we see the biggest impact in supply chain? I would say one of the things is real estate.
Yes.
If you own or are in long-term leases with commercial buildings and or manufacturing plants, and your demand gets cut in half, how do you manage that, right? Selling property or trying to get out of contract. So for me, I think that's a big part of it. And then it's how do you downsize, I guess, your team and all of your contracts. You still need to operate, but you need to operate at a much different level.
Well, and I have two different thoughts on what you just said because I love that. Like in our household, we're talking about reducing our Amazon purchases because we're doing taxes and whatnot, and figured out that we spend a ridiculous amount of money on Amazon because it's easy, it's efficient, and we love it. But there are other circumstances that are making us reevaluate, not just politics, but just making our reevaluate our choices on where we spend our money. And I think we're going to start to see, much like we've seen Tesla drive off a cliff, at least the stock price. I think we will see a little bit of pushback on Amazon, and that's, I think, natural and the part of the evolution. So I do think as consumption, and sort of to your question about retail, like that will continue to change and evolve, because maybe like next day shipping on absolutely everything is maybe we don't need that. Now, that was one thread. Then the other thing on you said that the other thread that you inspired when you in your statement in your comment is as we reduce commercial footprint, the one area that is growing, and I've seen this actually from real estate investors on TikTok. Everything I get is on TikTok apparently, but there's a growth around data centers. And because we were talking about this beforehand, before we started recording, is data center. A lot of companies are resourcing out of the cloud to on-prem. Just like everything, it goes yo-yoing back and forth. And there is a definitive push, like just standing up a data center is not as simple as it used to be or ever should have been. So,
So when I think about the commercial real estate, I think about the Westfield Mall in San Francisco. That used to be like one of the most hustle bustle, like lively, high-end, nicest malls in the Bay Area, probably in all of California. It is completely almost empty.
yep.
I walked through it when we were in San Francisco a couple months ago, and I almost cried. Like, it was so depressing.
Same. Yeah. Yeah.
It's like a ghost town. Like, every major store has left. There's like, I don't know, less than 10 stores in the entire building, and it's like a 3 or 4 story building. And then we were in Monterey last weekend, and there was like I forget the name of it, but it's the Cannery Row. There
Yeah.
was a mall area where you can rent bikes, and completely locked up, shut down the
Yeah.
entire mall. And there were hundreds of stores in that mall. So I just have this visualization in my mind of these like large malls and all these real estate buildings just sitting completely empty as demand and consumption reduces, and we don't have as much, happening in the world of retail in person anymore.
Well, I'll go. Yeah. So just to put a point on when I moved to the Bay Area in the early 90s, that was like, you're not kidding. It wasn't even the Westfield Mall. I don't remember what it was called, but anyway, um, it was bustling was not even an accurate term, and the upper 4 or 5 floors was Macy's, but before that it was Emporium, and my sister-in-law worked there, and we'd go visit her, and it was just a place to be. You could go Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. and be bustling. And by the way, I grew up as an 80s kid, like they put in a brand new mall when I was in high school, and like we spent all of it.
A cool thing.
It was exactly the cool thing. I want to say I was a mall rat, and maybe I wasn't that sort of. But anyway, that's where that's where as high schoolers you get jobs, and it was hot. It was like the newest thing. And if you if you watch movies from that time, like Encino Man and Fast Times at Ridgemont High, all the Brat Pack stuff or Brat Pack movies, they center around the mall because it was this touchstone. And as a youngin, it was very impactful to my generation. And now it is so sad to think, wow, like nobody goes to malls anymore. And just to put a point on that is this I watched on YouTube, but I've seen several videos where malls are being turned into apartments.
Yes.
And so I'm so fascinated by this. Not that that's for me, but at this point in my life, but it's so wild. I watch those videos. It's like, oh my God, I know that mall. So anyway.
Yeah. So when we went to Monterey, the mall closure I just mentioned, Paul's mom, before she passed, lived in Pacific Grove, which is a super little place by Monterey for folks that don't know the Bay Area well. And the downtown of Pacific Grove, I would say a fourth of the retail buildings are now being converted into condos.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of like the new trend in that area because consumption is going down. So we have less retailers. And so developers need to do something, right, to optimize their revenue so they can get it through housing.
Yeah. And the question is do high rent places like downtown San Francisco or downtown New York, Manhattan or wherever, is that where the real estate will be? Or do we go to more nondescript business parks in the middle of nowhere, like Pleasanton and Dublin here in the Bay Area that have just grown exponentially? And I don't know the answer, but it is interesting to see where real estate sort of value goes in this post-consumption world.
Mm-hmm. So to circle back to the theme here today around the whole disruption of supply chain and luxury goods, I think this is definitely a trend we should watch and report back maybe in 6 months and kind of see if we're noticing any major shifts in luxury brands. I think you're going to see a retooling of marketing because marketers are going to have a real challenge trying to create this sense and this brand awareness for a generation that doesn't necessarily care about brand loyalty and doesn't care about, quote, high end or being a part of a tribe or being a part of something.
And I also think from a supplier or supply chain point of view, what's your differentiation? If you can just, if it's clear, like if you're manufacturing, if you're just one of another set of products coming out of a particular country, like why should I pay more for that? And it's interesting, just speaking of marketing, because I was walking with my neighbor and we were talking about this whole thing, and she's a big TikTok consumer like me. And I was trying to explain to her sort of how we were going to set this episode up. And I had a flashlight, and it's an Anchor flashlight, and they make all these rechargeable devices. And I love this flashlight. And Anchor is one of the few Chinese brands that has sort of been able to enter the US market and develop its own brand. And it's very affordable. And the products, at least the ones I've bought, have been great. And by the way, they're not a sponsor. But and I was explaining, it's like, well, am I going to go to REI or am I going to buy some other one or am I going to buy this Anchor one, which is cheap and has really good quality and it does exactly what I need? And so then the question is if I go straight to in this case, a Chinese brand, but it could be brands from anywhere else, like, why do I need the middleman? And which has historically been the brand.
Exactly. And so if some of these TikTok folks are telling the truth and they are actually manufacturing these luxury goods, do you need to go buy for a logo, or can you go direct and get the same thing?
Yeah, and that remains to be seen. And I think this will be one of the big sort of aha moments or changes that we may see over the next decade, I would say. This is, I mean, beyond just the short term. And who knows, maybe where we had malls when I was a youngin', maybe we'll have offshore mall, like container ship malls.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Like it remains to be seen. The question I have is, can you take a helicopter ride out and visit?
Or take a Waymo and you don't have to speak to a driver.
Oh my God, yes. By the way, just totally random, but I just saw an article that they may actually start selling Waymos to consumers. And I was like, I said to my wife, we are buying one of those. Absolutely.
Bucket list item for me this year. I live in the Bay Area. I have no excuse is to download the Waymo app and actually go in one. When I was in Phoenix, they were literally everywhere downtown.
Yeah.
I would say that I've seen more there than any other city. But next time I go to San Francisco, I want to sit in the front and have no driver. I just think that is so random, and I want to see what it feels like.
Yeah, and you know what? Maybe we'll go on location and we'll just do it live, some sort of, not live, but some recording from there.
What? Maybe we should do a podcast in a Waymo. Right? You could do a whole
Sold.
episode
Sold.
in a Temu.
Yeah. Yes. I'd love it.
Alrighty, is that a wrap for today?
That is a wrap, but be sure to watch what new trend comes on TikTok next.
Yeah. We will be back next Thursday.